Hi, in this video I will explain how to create a CRUD in 20 minutes. I wanna make it clear that there will be many things that I won't explain in detail. I am also assuming that you have XAMPP correctly configured, as well as MySQL properly set up. The entire code is in the description, you can use it. I hope this video helps you. First, we need to create a database in MySQL. I will use MySQL on Linux, but you can use MySQL on Windows with no problem. We will create a database. I'll use the name school page. Additionally, I will create a table in it with the name students with the columns ID, first name, last name, and age. I will also populate it with some values. Another table named users will be created to store the user who can access the page. This table will have the columns ID, username, and email, and we will populate it with some values as well. This is all that we will do in MySQL. Next, we open an ID and create a folder for our project. I will be using XAMPP, so I will create it in the htdocs folder. In this folder, we create a PHP file named dbconnection, where we'll put the code to help us connect to MySQL. Inside, we define variables to connect to MySQL. For the hostname, we need to put the IP address of our MySQL server. For the username, we use the MySQL username, and for the password, we use the corresponding password. For the database, we put the name of the database we created earlier. If you are going to use MySQL on Windows, you can put the values on the screen. Now, we declare a connection variable where we put all the variables we created with the function MySQL connect. We create an if condition to check if the connection is not successful. If the connection fails, an error message will be displayed on the screen. Otherwise, it will show that the connection is successful. I forgot to mention that the file should have the PHP extension. Now we go to the browser and in the URL we type the location of our server, which in this case is localhost, and we include the name of our file, dbconnection.php. We should see a message indicating that the connection to the MySQL database is successful. Next, we go back to the IDE and create a folder named CSS. In that folder you will place the files that I provide in the description. I will explain CSS here, so you can just copy and paste the files. Then we create a folder named includes, and inside it we will create a file named header.php. This file will help us include the HTML head section in every page without having to write it each time. Inside the header we are going to put the following code. Feel free to pause the video to write it down. This is just some HTML code that we are going to use on our page. We will also use Bootstrap, but I will not explain its usage. We also create another file, footer.php, that works similarly to the header, but it contains the closing code of the page. With this done, we are going to create an index.php file, which will be our main page. We will include the header PHP file and the dbconnection PHP file. Inside the page, we create a title and a table where we will display the data from our database, with the columns ID, first name, last name, and age. For this example, I'm going to put some static values in the table. At the bottom of the file, we include the footer. Now we test the index page. In the browser we type the location of index.php and open it. We see that the table is created without style, and we also see the connected to DB message. Therefore, we can remove the text in the dbconnection.php file. Now we need to display the data from the MySQL database on the page, so we need to modify the index.php file and create a PHP code. First, we create a variable called query that will contain the SQL query code for MySQL. Then we create a variable result to save the data from the query. We create a condition where, if the result is false, it shows an error, but if the condition contains data, We use a while loop to iterate over each row of the query result and place the corresponding data in the necessary table columns. In the browser, we reload the page, and all the data from the MySQL server is displayed in the table. Next, I will add some divs to style the table, but I will not explain this in detail, so feel free to copy and paste the code from the description. Next, we will create a function that adds students to the database. We need to use a model with a form to input the new data. First, create a button name add student. Then, create a div that will store the form. Inside, we created 3 levels for the first name, last name, and age. Now, I will add some code for the model that will help us with this functionality. You can research how it works in Bootstrap on your own. We go to the browser and refresh the page. Now we can see the button, and if we click on it, the model will show with the form. We go back to the code and add a model header to include a next button to close the model. Also add a model footer to include 2 more buttons, close to close the model, and add to submit the form and add a new student. We save the changes, and when we open the browser and click refresh, we can see the changes are visible. The next step is to add the functionality to send the form data to the database. We create a folder named action, and inside it create a PHP file named insert data. In this file we need to include the DB connection file. Then we add a condition to check if there is a post request named as student. If there is, we execute the code below, which involves saving all the form values into variables. Now, in the same if statement, we create another if statement to check if any of the values are empty. If any are, we won't upload them, using the header function that we will write it later, and some code that also we will write it later. Also, I need to mention that I forgot to add the other condition in the if statement, so I will include them in the GitHub file. If all the fields of the form are filled with text, we create a query to add the values from the fields to the MySQL server. If the query fails, we generate an error to show on the screen using the header function. Go to the browser, reload the page, and open the Add Student model. Enter the values for a student and click Add. Since we haven't added anything to the header function, it will open a blank page. However, if we go back to the index page, we will see the new data inside the table. So now we need to add some code to the header function. Inside, we need to specify a direction for where to go when the Add button is clicked. Because this is PHP, we can add a message to the URL. That message can be used to show a notification on the index page. We need to go back to the index page and add the following code to show a message from the server, using the get method to retrieve the message. This way we can check that the message appears when the form is empty. Just open the model, click Add, and the message will show on the index page at the bottom of the page. The same can be done when we add some data. Just modify the header function and add the code to the index page. And everything will work fine if we check the browser and add another student. It's time to add the functionality for the update button. The first step is to add the button to the table. So we modify the index file to include the update button. Once we check in the browser, we should see that the button has been added. Next, we create a folder named content, and inside it we create a PHP file named update page. Inside this file we include the header and DB connection files. We also add PHP code with a conditional that checks if the get method with an ID parameter is present. If it is, we save the ID in a variable with the same name and create a query to select all the values of the student. If the query fails, we show an error, but if it's successful, we store the results in a variable called row. Below this, we add a conditional to check if a pod request exists. Inside this conditional, we retrieve all the form fields that we will create and store them in variables to update the fields in the database, with a header function to redirect if the query is done correctly. We copy and paste the forms of the add student because are very similar, but we modify some things to match the actual code. Also, I made an error. The update page needs to be outside of the content folder, inside the root folder. We need to modify the routes that will be affected. We open the browser and click on update. We can see that the form opens but has no values and no update button. So we go back to the update page to make changes to the form. First, we need to add the value attributes for the respective fields. Also, we search for errors and find that I misspelled the get method. We also ensure that the header function works correctly and add the message on the index page. With all that done, we reload the page and click on the update button again to open the form. We can see that the student data is loaded into the fields, and we modify the values and click on update. The values will be changed in the database. Also, I forgot to add functionality to prevent the user from leaving the fields empty and submitting the data that way. Next, we are going to implement the delete function to remove the student from the database. To start, we need to add the button, similar to how we did with the update function. Then we create a delete page file in the content folder. Inside delete page PHP we include the necessary files. As we have been doing in the video, we create the algorithm to make a query on the SQL server, but the query is delete from, and we retrieve the ID of the student we want to delete. We also add a conditional to check if the query is null, and if it is correct, we use the header function to redirect to the index page and display a message. We also add the message to the index PHP file. We save and reload the browser. When we click on a student, we see how the student is deleted from the table. However, we encounter some errors because I misspelled the variable result and the error message in index.php. We correct these errors, reload the page and delete another student to see if everything is working correctly. And yes, everything is correct. For the last part, we are going to create a login page. We create the file login page PHP in the root directory, and inside we include the necessary files that we have been doing previously. Inside we add the following code, which essentially includes a login form that we can see if we go to the browser and enter the corresponding URL for the file. The login page file is only for displaying the form. For the login action, we will create a file named login process inside the actions folder. Inside we include the necessary files and add a new function, session start, to indicate to PHP that we are starting a session. Below we add a condition similar to what we have been doing, but with the values from the users table that we create at the beginning of the video. We then execute the query to check if the entered username and email match any values in the MySQL users table. We store the query result in the variable result, and if it is not null, we create a variable row to store the result of the number of matching rows. If it equals 1, it means the user exists in the database and should be redirected to the index.php page, which is the main page. If not, we simply send a message to the user indicating that their username does not exist. We save the file and go to the browser to check that everything is correct. First, by entering an invalid email, we see that an error is displayed. Now, we enter a correct username and see that it allows to connect the index page. Next, we need to create a logout PHP file to log out from the session from the index page. We create a button that redirects to the logout process file that we will create, and inside it, we add the following code to end the session. We reload the page and see how it returns to the login page. Finally, to prevent users from skipping the login page, we need to create a method that ensures that unless the user has an active session, they cannot access the index page. We add the following code in index.php to create an active session as long as the user has logged in through login page. I will include a welcome message for the user. We go to the browser and check that if we try to go to the index page, it redirects us to the login page, indicating that we need to log in first. We then log in, but encounter an error that prevents us from accessing the page. The issue was that I misspelled the session variable in the login process file. we correct that and we see that it allows us to log in, showing a welcome message.